Tamara Payne served as the principal researcher and co-author on The Dead Are Rising, the life of Malcolm X, which won the Pulitzer Prize in biography and National Book Award for nonfiction, was longlisted for the Andrew Carnegie Medal for Excellence in Nonfiction, and was named a Best Book of the Year by the New York Times, the Washington Post, and many other publications. Les Payne, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist who served as an editor and columnist at Newsday, worked on The Dead Are Rising for nearly 30 years. Tamara, his daughter, completed the book after his passing. Glenn Hare is Associate Director of Communications at Seattle Opera. He has worked in arts communications and marketing his entire career, having served in government agencies, public broadcasting, and universities. Most recently, he was Director of Marketing and Communications at the Brooks Center for Performing Arts at Clemson University. Please join me in welcoming Tamara Payne and Glenn Hare.
Wow, that's a nice welcome. Lovely. I'm going to echo a little bit of what Dennis said. First, I'd like to thank Town Hall, our wonderful host, and the Elliott Bay Book Company for being our book-selling partners. And I also want to thank Tamara for being here. Welcome to Seattle. I understand this is your first time visiting the city.
It is. And it's a beautiful city. I'm so happy to be here. And I also want to thank Town Hall, as well as I wanted to mention the Seattle Public Library. I did a virtual event with the Seattle Public Library, Town Hall, and I think there were a couple other sponsors of that program. And I did a virtual event when our book came out in 2020. So I was here virtually, and I'm happy to be here in person.
And we're happy to have you here live and in person as well. You're here to help us celebrate and investigate the life of Malcolm X. And as a reminder, because Dennis didn't mention it, we are opening the opera on February the 24th. That's a Saturday, so if you haven't had your tickets, I welcome you to come. You worked with your dad on this book a long time.
Yes.
And so I want to talk a little bit about your father a bit. I know that he is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, but what is his backstory? How did he navigate the great migration from Alabama with his family to being a leading newspaper man of our times?
Great question. My father was born in 1941 in Alabama, Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And he stayed down there with his family till about the age of 12. They moved up to Hartford, Connecticut. And, my grandmother at the time, she was raising she had 3 sons. And she was realizing that they weren't going to necessarily survive the South, Jim Crow South. And as many families, Black families in particular, wanting more opportunities, and also wanting to save. And this is a similar story of what we find with Earl Little. When he's in Georgia, and his father is telling him to leave Georgia because he is so independent, my strong opinion, and he was bringing unwanted attention to the family because he was telling people what he thought and where to go, basically. And his father was just saying, this is not safe. And so he ended up going on. So this is the story of a lot of our families who went up north. And so my grandmother, she ended up in Hartford. So my father went to junior high school, and then he eventually went to college at the University of Connecticut. And then after graduating from the University of Connecticut, he went into the Army because he wanted to be a writer, but what other opportunities were there for him as a Black man with a college degree? And so he went into the Army. and he wanted to be an information officer. He took the exam. The Army was, you had to have certain clearances to get that, and he was having problems getting those clearances. So he was taking different classes and doing other things. And then he finally got the clearance and went over to Vietnam, and he served as an information officer under General Westmoreland. And what that meant was that he would be a speechwriter. He was answering letters and the communications for General Westmoreland. He was running the base newspaper, and one of the experiences he had was taking a Washington Post reporter around the base to learn what the base life was like. And this reporter wrote about how the Confederate flag was emblazoned on the trucks. And this was read by the President of the United States, and he got on the phone to General Westmoreland and told him to have this removed. My father, he calls him up at Saigon time, 3 a.m. And my father, learning from this experience, is understanding the power of journalism and how information, when it's printed, factually checked and verified, it has power. And that was a mantra we heard, and I mean we, my family, my mother, who I'm sure is watching this. Hi, Mom. And my brothers, Jamal and Hailey. There's a mantra we heard, while growing up, was information is power. We need factually verified information so that we can make informed decisions. That was his passion, that everybody in America under the Constitution has this right that we be able to make informed decisions in how we vote, who we elect as, city council members. All of these decisions are important, but we have to know that, we have to know the facts. We can't just go by our feelings and our emotions. So that's important.
So not only did he serve as an information officer after he left military service, he worked at Newsday.
Yes.
He was part of a Pulitzer Prize-winning team that investigated the heroin trade from Turkey through France, as we know as the French Connection now, into New York City. He worked his way up through the ranks to become managing editor. He was a national columnist. In the parlance of days gone by, I would consider your father an old-fashioned newspaper man, a newspaper man who asked the hard questions, got on the phone, did the legwork, and went deep into a topic. How do you think that experience informed how he would shape this book?
Well, it was investigative journalism, and that's where he really found his passion, was to investigate stories, to learn what happened. He did not like to hear, "We may never know." That would send him to find out for sure. It may take longer. He may miss deadlines, but he wanted to know. And I also want to give another shout out to my mom, because part of being successful, his success was also having a partner, who was able to keep our home, patient, quiet, calm. I mean, they had 3 children. And, and my mother, I also want to mention, is that, Violet Payne, she also saw Malcolm X. So my brothers and I are products of 2 parents who saw Malcolm while they were in college. She was at Howard University and saw the Malcolm X debate, Bayard Rustin. So I just wanted to put that in there too, that we are the product of 2 people who were impacted by Malcolm. So they were evenly hooked. They had this desire to, they saw eye to eye on this. And that's important too, as part of this story.
Well, thank you, Mom, who's watching tonight. The Dead Are Rising, at least for me, reads like no other biography about Malcolm X. It's very intimate, primarily because of the folks that he interviews. It's like people sitting around a kitchen table and remembering what they know about Malcolm with each other. So with that sort of in mind, I'm going to take us through the book a little bit, and you can comment or share stories around some of those moments. I want to start with Malcolm's early childhood. As we know, he was born in Nebraska. His parents, Earl and Louise, were Garveyites, followers of Marcus Garvey. How do you think that it affected the way that they raised their children?
Well, I think you have to also understand the personalities of Earl and Louise Little. I mean, Louise Little grew up in Grenada, and she immigrated to Canada and happened to meet Earl at a Marcus Garvey UNIA meeting in Montreal. And meanwhile, Earl, when he left Georgia, he went to Philadelphia, and he was going to these other cities in the Northeast coast to see, you know, what city would be interesting to him. So he actually had met Louise in Montreal at a UNIA meeting. But this group, this organization, attracted both of them. So this independent spirit, this self-determination that both of them had. Louise Little was very much, and at that time, Langdon Norton, she's very independent. She wants an entrepreneur. She wants to start her own business, which is part of the reasons why she left Grenada. And so they're both very strong-minded, independent, and that's there. So having an organization to help feed that and help them express that and grow and learn more, and meeting other people, helping to organize communities. And that's what they were doing when they went into these different towns, is that they would go into the meet among Black people and educate them about the tenets of the UNIA organization, Marcus Garvey, which is being self-determination. It was having pride in being who we are as Black people, being independent-minded. And also, in the background there was this connection also with Africa.
Do you know if the siblings got along together?
Which siblings? You mean
Malcolm
and his siblings?
Yes, and his brothers.
Oh, there's always sibling rivalry when you have kids. You have siblings. I mean, my father first spoke with one of the brothers when and this is what inspired him to even find, again, journalists wanting to find something new. He spoke with one of Malcolm's brothers, and this brother was explaining like what it was like growing up as children of Earl and Louise, how he and Malcolm, you know, were very competitive, and Dad was finding like, I never seen Malcolm this way. This is new, and we need to know this. And so, you know, and he was processing this, and he was speaking with another journalist back in New York, Gil Noble, who hosted a show at the time called Like It Is, was very important in New York area. And Gil Noble was like, which brother did you speak to? And he said, spoke to Philbert. He said, the brother you should speak to is Wilfred, who was the oldest child of Earl and Louise, also best friend of Malcolm and his confidant throughout his life. And my dad went back to Detroit to meet Wilfred. And when he's learning these stories of them growing up. So you have Philbert, who's a couple years older than Malcolm, and you have Wilfred, who's more like 5 or 6 years older than Malcolm. So there's a distance, and Wilfred's version on Malcolm was he got to see him as a baby growing up. He was smart, you know. He said that he signed on to the fact that he was his father's favorite.
Right.
He went on to go to the UNIA meetings with his father, and their mother, you know, who was more. She was the disciplinarian with Malcolm, but with the other children, with everybody, she was a proponent of education. She wanted to make sure that these kids, her children, would get the education they needed to succeed in this world. And that wasn't simply just reading what you learned in school, reading newspapers outside of school. She would help them with their homework. But their father also was great at helping them with understanding their work ethic. You know, you can't be lazy. You got to get up early. You have to your chores. You have to do your chores. So there was a teamwork going on here in this family. But we also have to understand, and what's important is we wanted to put this family in the context, and Malcolm in the context of the times, because the importance of this book, when we say that Malcolm has always kind of been presented to us as fully formed and angry and promoting violence. But we wanted to learn more about what was the world that Malcolm was born into, because that also shapes who he is. And as far as this thing on violence, it was never something I or my father agreed with, because he was preaching nonviolence. As far as he wanted self-defense. If somebody lays their hand on you, you have the right to defend yourself.
Right.
And I'm sure everybody teaches that. I mean, look at our country with guns. So what are we talking about?
I'm going to skip forward several years now to around the 1930s. And at this point, the Littles have experienced a lot of trauma, a lot of disruption. And I want to paint a picture of what's kind of going on here. Earl has died under suspicious circumstances. The family is penniless. There's some shifty, shady, and life insurance policy problems that are happening that you document in the book. The family is under pressure. Louise is mentally traumatized. She's trying to make ends meet. The older children are trying to make the ends meet. And we find Malcolm in the center of all of this. And how does he react to this upheaval that the family is experiencing at this moment?
I mean, the loss of Earl, and before Earl's passing, their house was burned down. So, I mean, this is, again, looking at the times. Who's burning down the house? Who was trying to get them evicted out of their house? Was neighbors bringing out the fact that there was exclusive clauses on the land, that black people could not own the land or live on the land, even if they owned it. And so the neighbors moved to have them evicted. And then next thing you know is their house is burned down. And then soon after that, and I don't mean days or weeks, I mean I believe it's almost a year after that Earl dies. And this is tragic. I mean, this is one event after another. And, this is traumatic for Malcolm, who's close to his father. This is traumatic for the other siblings. It's obviously tragic. I mean, what they were able to have that was steady is now, it's shook. It's unsteady now. And so Malcolm kind of has lost his North Star now. And so how do you feel? How does a young boy feel when he loses his father? It's never good. And so he falls into, I mean, they all deal with it in their different ways, but Malcolm, it affects him, and also seeing what's happening with, the pressure he sees happening with his family. The family's still poor, and he's lost, and that's how he expressed it. His oldest brother, Wilfred, he steps in to help keep everybody together. And when we read these stories of like the insurance policy, they get one insurance policy, which is smaller, but that doesn't really pay anything. The largest insurance policy, which really would have helped out, the insurance company says that Earl committed suicide. So you have that. Then you also have the probate judge who is issuing Louise Little's her widow's pension. And he's trying to have her sign over their property to him and his family. And so that's more pressure. And, so this is just constant outside forces coming in against his family. And so, Malcolm, he's losing his way. He's hanging out, he's, finding other vices to get into, and this happens. And unfortunately, this happens to teenagers, and you see this happen.
Yes.
It's not an unusual story.
Sadly, that's true. It's not an unusual story.
No.
So Louise is institutionalized. The family is split up. They're put in foster homes or with relatives far away. And Malcolm is sent to Boston.
Well, he's split up. First, he goes to Mason, and there's this whole experience that he experiences there in Mason where he has to repeat his grade, and he befriends a lot of the white students in Mason, and he's even elected class president, and he flourishes there in those circumstances. But then the next year, he is kind of removed from this home, the reformatory home he was in, to be with another family. And again, he's just angry. He doesn't have any control here. He doesn't have any say. This is not what he wants to do. And he's writing to his sister, his half-sister, who is a daughter of Earl's from his previous marriage. And he's asking her, for help. He's like, I want to get out of here. And she's not happy, first of all, that he's not with their family and he's with, in the hands of the state. So she manages to have him brought to her in Boston. And here's the other thing is like what we're seeing this thing is his family is there. Mm-hmm. And they're kind of still, tragedy is happening, but they're catching as catch can, and they're still carrying him along. And it's important to recognize that.
Right.
That he's not alone. He's not, they're not even throwing him away.
Right.
At any of these points.
So what happens to Malcolm in Boston?
Yeah. He's not going to go back to school. He is well into his teen years, and he looks older than he is. And so he's getting into, jazz clubs, and he gets these little jobs, shoe shining. He meets up with Malcolm Jarvis, who is in Boston already, and he is a musician. So he helps Malcolm navigate this. And but the other thing is that he's learning this is another section of the United States he's never been to. It's all new to him, and as he's open, he's learning, and it's exciting to him, and he gets to see the big jazz artist Duke Ellington, and he's writing to his friends back home in Lansing and Mason, and he's telling about all the acts he's seeing and all this excitement. But the other thing that is, Ella, because again, family, she manages to get him a job working on the railroad, and he is able to now travel up and down the Northeast corridor, from, all the way from Boston down to as far as D.C. and probably even further. But definitely he's paying attention to these different cities. So he spends time in D.C., he spends time in Philly, he spends time in New York, and that's where he just falls in love with the city of New York. And he, once he gets fired, he's fired a couple of times actually from the railroad. And but then he goes to New York, and he's hustling, but he's not the only one who's hustling. This is a time for everybody. I mean, we're coming out of the Depression. Yep. We're still in the mid-30s now, and getting closer to when World War II starts. And but so everybody is hustling. It's not just Malcolm. So you have everybody's doing this, trying to get by, trying to make a buck, and it's it's cross color lines. It's everybody is hustling. But the other thing about Malcolm, and I'm excited too, because one of the places we write about in this book about Jimmy's Chicken Shack, it's fortunately a family has opened up a restaurant, an Ethiopian restaurant there now, that you can still go to. So I enjoy, to share, that you can still see some of his haunts. So Jimmy's Chicken Shack is where Malcolm worked in the kitchen with Red Fox, who became Fred Sanford.
That's true.
Yeah. And so they worked there. And so it is great to go to this restaurant to, this day, today, and you can still wonder if Malcolm was here with Red Fox, But yeah, so he was in Harlem, and he was doing his hustling, and things happen. He ends up going back to Boston, and as we know, he gets caught up with, he organizes crime ring, and they go into people's homes where he's hooked up with this woman who's Armenian, and and she has helped him, case these joints. She's cased the joints, and she selected where they would go, and then he's gone with his gang, and they go in and steal things, and they end up getting caught.
Now, she doesn't go to prison, but he does.
He does.
Yes, he's sentenced to 5 years. Charlestown State Prison, a maximum security prison. It's been compared to the Bastille. It's like a dungeon.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about his time in prison and how prison life changed Malcolm.
I mean, up until this point, Malcolm has been running. You know, he's always been active and searching and, and dealing with, this trauma, from his family of being split up, losing his father. His mother's is in the asylum, and it's, these are not happy memories for him, So in prison, he kind of has to sit down and think about what he's done and how this has affected people. And, it's hard for him to, in the beginning, he's ashamed when his siblings come to see him. And it's, it's difficult. But the thing is that he meets somebody in there, Bembry.
Yeah, John Bembry.
John Bembry, and John Bembry is this brilliant guy who's in there. Has an autodidactic memory, and and he's been arguing with and debating with people, and people who other people as the other inmates, and they're saying, we don't agree with what you're saying, and he said, well, they would challenge him, and he would argue them into the corner, and Malcolm would watch this, and he would learn, that language can be really powerful, and he's studying Bembry, and Bembry, he looks at Malcolm, he's like, you have a brain if you use it. So you should use it instead of fighting with your hands and getting more trouble. Like, you should use your brain to get yourself out of trouble,
right?
And so he tells Malcolm, you should read, should read, and he's giving people to read, and Malcolm just he wants to read more, and so he has limited access at Charlestown. He finds out about this prison in Norfolk Prison Colony. And Malcolm Jarvis also finds out about it, and he ends up getting transferred. He's trying to get, he's telling Malcolm you should go there too, and Malcolm Jarvis goes. Malcolm Jarvis and Malcolm X Malcolm Little went into prison together. So they were there together. But Malcolm Jarvis got transferred first. Malcolm talks to Ella, and she manages to get him transferred to the Norfolk Prison Colony, and he continues with learning more about whatever he can get his hands on. It just, his mind is open now. And the thing is that prison time just made him sit down to do that.
Right. Yeah. Now, he's reading everything. He's reading the great philosophers. He's reading Shakespeare. He joined the debate team.
Yes.
And at that time, debate teams from prestigious
Ivy League schools
would come and debate with the prisoners. And I think it's there that he hones his rhetorical skills. He learns how to fashion an argument, how to present it, and then how to make his point clear as he sums it all up. He is developing a mind, an ability to think on his feet that would serve him well in the years ahead.
And that's what he wanted to, because he saw Bembry do this, and so he wants to further this. But the other thing is that let's also keep in mind, Malcolm is not stupid. He was educated by his mother, who look, and his mother, she spoke not just English, she spoke French. She used to sing to them in French, and so. He was exposed to language at an early age. That's still in his background. And again, when you understand what we're influenced or exposed to at a very young age, it follows us throughout our lives. And and even with what we find out with Marcus Garveyism, which is one of the things I found really interesting when we were doing our work, was just that Garveyism, that the self-determination, building up your communities, supporting of Black people, having the pride, but also, this whole thing of connecting up with Africa, even what we find, later on, we'll talk in more detail, but this was also in the background with Malcolm. Right. So that he's able to have this time to allow this to rise up and focus. and really spend time to do this. He couldn't do this if he's hustling, trying to pay rent.
Right.
You know, and eat and stay at, stay ahead of the cops.
Stay ahead. It's also at this time he's introduced to the Nation of Islam. And I get the sense that Malcolm was reluctant to adhere to some of the teachings, but it takes some pushing and some prodding from his family members. Again, to echo what you said earlier, he has a support system that hasn't abandoned him. Tell us about his introduction to the Nation of Islam.
You have to go back to Wilfred. I mean, while Malcolm's in prison, Wilfred, look, the mother is in the asylum. Wilfred is visiting her. The siblings are still visiting her. They have not, lost touch with her, but he still has to live his life. And so the children are, they're growing up, and he has to start living his life. So he's looking for community, because he always had this kind of community, from his own family. So he's looking for that. And at this point, the UNIA in Lansing is not doing well. And this was the organization that his father had helped, open up in Lansing. But so he comes across another group, Nation of Islam. He comes across it through somebody he's working with at a furniture store. Wilfred, who's he's just this, I met Wilfred, and he was just a wonderful person. He was very generous, very intelligent, looked a lot like Malcolm, I felt, would look at if he had gotten past the age of 39. He was very tall. But he had this thing about helping people when they were in trouble.
Right.
And he was helping, like when he saw wrongdoing happening in the job, he would step up and he would say, you shouldn't treat people like this. Somebody, if they deserve a promotion, if they've done the work, you should pay them. And when the managers wanted to mess with some of the workers and not pay them, and he would step up, and somebody watched this and said, are you part of the Nation of Islam? And he's like, what is that? And he said, well, look, I'm watching you, and these things that you're doing, you're not afraid to speak up. You're not afraid to speak up to the white managers and white owners and tell them when they're wrong. And he says, the only group of people I know who do that are in the Nation of Islam. And he said, well, it might be a good group to be a part of. And he started to investigate them. He looks at them, and he sees that they carry on the same tenets that were in the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association. So he's drawn to that. But then he also says that they need a lot of help. They need help rewriting their literature. They need help getting the word out about who they are and what they're doing. But he sees it. And so he kind of steps in, kind of like, Earl did before him, and he helps organize it. And when he finally does end up meeting Elijah, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, he says, there are things that you could do better. And Elijah Muhammad said, if you don't like this, then rewrite it. And so he showed him how to work with language and rewrite the literature. And then he started building up, getting more responsibility in the organization. Then he was getting his other siblings and bringing them in. And all the while, he's also saying this would be great for Malcolm. Malcolm's sitting in prison. But he says, this would be a great place for Malcolm to land. So, again, the family is there. And it's, and so when it comes to time, because he's speaking to Elijah Muhammad about his brother who's in prison, and he's like, I hope that you please write to him, and he's not in a good place necessarily, but he's like, he could really use encouragement. And Elijah Muhammad did. He wrote to him, and the other siblings wrote to him. But in the beginning, when he's trying to get Malcolm's attention to this, Wilfred knows his siblings, and so he kind of he creates this way of who's going to speak to Malcolm and what they're going to say, and how they're going to convince Malcolm to be a part of this. Malcolm at this point, he is, reading a lot, and so he's calmed down, so he's more able to receive more information, and and his brothers are saying, hey, stop eating pork. I can help you get free. And Malcolm's all ears, you know.
Right.
So it starts with that. But then, you know, what we find in this area, right, is that one of the things that they're talking about with the Nation of Islam is the blue-eyed devils and white man as a devil. And Malcolm did not agree with this. And, you know, and this thing is not that, it's not about hating white people. It's about hating the way white people were treating them, you know, black people in the organization. And so it comes out, and this is the language that they were using. And so when they're talking to Malcolm about this, Malcolm was saying, no, I can name situations where, you know, white people have been really good to me.
Right,
and
right.
Wilfred has this brother, Reginald, talk to him. And he says, well, let me tell you a story. And he tells him the story about, you know, Malcolm tells him the story about how he was, you know, he got paid when he was holding all this money. They trusted him holding the money, and they paid him a lot of money. And this is when they were numbers runners in Harlem, by the way. And he said the white man had trusted him with all this money. And Reginald said if they really trust you, they would have given you a larger cut of the money.
Right, right.
And that's what you start to cut in to say there are holes in this. And so that's when, you know, they're starting to make headway with Malcolm. So then he starts to read more. He's starting to add this, what his family is doing with the Nation of Islam, and add this to his own education through the readings that he's doing. And he's opening up. He's learning more. And the other thing is about life is that we learn. You know, at all stages of our lives, we should always be learning, you know, and Malcolm, he's an example of that. He throughout, and this is something that we loved seeing, you know, about Malcolm, is that at every stage, even when he was hustling, he was learning something new, and that built upon him. And when we say even later on, when he gets into the Nation of Islam and he comes out of jail, the thing is that Malcolm, through his education and pursuit of language and use of language and debating and reading and gaining all of this information, he's able to speak to educated people.
Right, right, right.
And he understands that the thing with especially college-educated people is that they have an understanding of the way the world works, and they're coming up with new ideas to produce new things and how to navigate the world. But then there's also, how do you speak to people who are blue-collar workers, who are laborers, and he's able to speak to them also. And that was, you know, this communication thing that Malcolm's a master at, you know, that this experience of, he did not allow prison to weigh him down and make him feel like he was worthless.
Right.
He worked at this.
Yes.
He came out ahead of this. He was not going to, you know, his family didn't throw him away, and he wasn't going to throw himself away either.
We could go on talking for another
Yeah.
hour, but I want to open up the floor to questions. But before we do that, I want to ask you about an area in the book that I just don't feel is covered quite in much detail as other parts, and that is his relationship with Betty. You basically say Malcolm could choose between two women, and he chose Betty, and they got married. I guess my question then is you and your father were working on the book, and Dr. Betty Shabazz was alive at the time. Did she know that you were working on the book?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, we did not interview Dr. Betty Shabazz. When we were working on this, and this kind of goes to my own interest in China, I had the opportunity of being in China for the United Nations Fourth World Conference on Women. Dr. Betty Shabazz was there also. And I met her. I met her through a friend of ours, my father's really, and Dr. Jibril Giallo, and he had introduced us, and it was one of those few times where I actually say, hey, I'm Les Payne's daughter. And
yeah.
And I said this in this situation because I know who Dr. Betty Shabazz is. It's incredible to meet Malcolm X's widow. And I told her, I said, yeah, I'm Les Payne. So she said, I know your daddy. And I was like, okay, great. And then she started talking about like her getting into China, and in the process, she forgot her eyeglasses. So she said she needed a magnifying glass. Now, I lived in China for a couple of years. I spoke Mandarin. I taught English in China. That's why I was there for 2 years. So being in Beijing was like another home for me. So when she had this request to get a magnifying glass, it was not a big deal for me. So I said, no problem, I'll get you one. She was like, really? I said, no problem. Just tell me where to meet you. And so I met her, gave her the magnifying glass. We had dinner. And during the dinner, I told her, I just want you to know, my father and I are working on this book about your husband. And yeah, I just want you to know that. And meaning, I did not want her to come back to the United States saying, oh, I met Les Payne, sir, but wait a minute, they're working on a book about my husband? She didn't tell me? So I wanted her to know that, and I did tell her, and she received it, you know. And we really wanted to focus on Malcolm's life, but this is not writing more about Dr. Betty Shabazz is not to minimize her relationship. She was very important, you know, and as his wife, as his partner, mother of their children. And like I talked about my mom, you know, she's keeping, while Malcolm is traveling around the nation and doing the work of the nation for the Nation of Islam, you know, she's at home, you know, keeping these children and dealing and being, she's in the nation also. And she has to be, you know, respectable too, because he's a minister at the mosque and he's the spokesman. So she has to keep up her appearances in the nation also. So I mean, she's very important. But as I said, we did not interview her, and what we wanted to focus was what we worked on. So
I understand.
Yeah.
And after her husband is assassinated, she has her own career.
Oh man.
She goes back and gets her doctorate. She's an educator, an advocate, and she raises the girls.
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to kind of close this by asking you a question about the book cover and the photograph that illustrates the book cover, because I understand it has a poignant moment for your father. So I'm kind of going full circle here. Tell us about this photograph and what it means to your family.
Well, this was taken the day before my father saw Malcolm speak at Bushnell Memorial in 1963. He did not choose this photograph, by the way. He had passed away when we were working on the cover. But when I found this, I felt connected to it, and then I looked at it, and I said, oh, wait a minute, this is in Hartford in the same year? And I looked at the date, and I said, it's the day before. So I said, this should be the cover. You know, and my family agreed. We voted on it, and yeah, so it's very important.
So it's an homage to him.
Yes.
Wonderful.
We wanted him on the front, and he's also in the back, his picture.
Okay, so let's open it up to questions now. If you have them, just come on up to the microphone.
And I'll read a couple that have come in through online. Can you share a surprising fact you and or your dad discovered about Malcolm X?
Surprising. I mean, I pause because this is like, where do you go? There's so many. One thing I will say, I'm reiterating, is that over the course of the project, and we knew how important Marcus Garvey was to Malcolm and his family, and we spent a lot of time talking about that in the beginning of the book, because it talks about the world Malcolm was born into, but to also realize in the course of the work that his work at the end of his life is also tied to that work, and that's connection to Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was very much about connecting up the black diaspora throughout the world, and Malcolm also too was talking about, you know, changing the fight and the language of the civil rights movement to our human rights, and bring up charges against the United States government to the UN and fighting for our human rights. And this is, to me, just a connection, and he's taken this even further, what Marcus Garvey was doing. So that was a really, it was a really important lesson for me to learn, and just understanding that. because a lot of times people have a hard time understanding what Malcolm learned or what Malcolm was doing after he left the Nation of Islam. He leaves the Nation of Islam in 1964. He immediately goes to Mecca and takes his Hajj, and then he's traveling throughout Africa. And these lessons also shape him in what he's doing at the end of his life. So a lot of people had a hard time understanding, especially in the context of the world back then. But now we understand it a lot better and how the world played out.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
I'll get everybody to open up here. Thank you very much, Dr. Payne, for being here. I'm Dawn Mason. I'm an Elder of Distinction for Africatown, Seattle. I'm a former state representative, and I actually met Malcolm X in 1958 with my father in Mosque number 7. I became a Muslim. But this is a question, it's not about Malcolm X. In your book, you speak that Jane Fonda was in Tulsa with her father when during the massacre.
No.
No, you did not write that in the book.
Are you talking about the incident of 1919?
Yes. No, her grandfather was there. I'm sorry, not her. So Jace is either her father or grandfather was there.
Can I explain?
You please, would you?
Sure. The incident in 1919, the Omaha incident, which
And it's
happened
Omaha,
in
not Tulsa.
1919,
Yes.
Omaha, Nebraska, where Malcolm was born in 1925. But we write about that because that happened a few years before his family moved there. And the environment of Omaha was hugely impacted by that incident. The incident I'm talking about is the lynching of Will Brown.
Yes.
And Henry Fonda, Jane Fonda's father,
The father.
was a witness. And his father. So yes, her
Yes.
grandfather was
I
there.
apologize. It
No
is
problem.
Omaha. It's not Tulsa. I do a lot of readings, a lot
It's
of
okay.
stuff going through my head. I apologize for that. I just wanted to ask you, because we know that Jane Fonda then became a wonderful liberator of justice in her life. She had that purpose. And do you feel like that having her father be there, that impacted her? Because you speak about how it impacted Malcolm X and his family, what his family knew. And so I just guess I want to ask you how parents and families impact their children and their future. That's all. And that there's a room full of people who most likely could learn that what we do impacts and it influences our
Absolutely.
children.
I
I'm sorry I messed up on all the facts.
No, it's okay.
but
It's okay.
there's a lot of stuff.
It's
if I
important
had-
that we get the story straight, and I appreciate your question. And I would like to add to that. I actually did see a interview with Jane Fonda recently. It wasn't a recent interview though, but she talks about how she did say the N-word in front of her father, and her father smacked her. And she was, stunned, and she said, he told her about this incident. And he said, don't you ever use that word again. And she never did. So yes, it did impact her.
Thank you for
Yeah.
that. I'm sorry I didn't have the whole.
No, it's fine.
But I thank you so much for that.
Yes. Next question.
Yeah, I've over many decades used the politics. The things that Malcolm X talked about were very important. There's a whole wide range of them, so I'm not going to. That's what my question is going to be about. But these are on the job with fellow workers, railroads, coal mines, including in the Oak Grove mine about 20 miles from Tuscaloosa. But I think that his ideas have got a real power to them that didn't die with him. In particular, his talking about that you awaken people not to their oppression, but to their value, to their worth. And I think that's something that means something to the entire working class, basically. And his insistence that what happened in the world, around the world, what was happening in the Congo, had deep relevance to the lives of people in the United States and elsewhere around the world. And his always reaching out to be, you said he would learn from things, and he was always reaching out he was always trying to learn to be basically a better revolutionary, and any time that he found an obstacle to that, he'd do something different. But at any rate, so my question is, what do you, by the way, I love your book. I bought it this morning. I've read as much as I could, and I hope you believe in book signings. But the,
Of course.
but the, how do you see the relevance, the most important ideas he had, and the perspective that he had in today's world, given what we face at home, what we face in this country, what we face, well, in every country around the world. How are his ideas still of deep importance today?
I mean, when Malcolm dies and we see people picking up his autobiography all over the world, he becomes bigger all over the world than he is even in the United States. But in the United States, people still were reading his autobiography. It's one of the biggest selling books. And his ideas, especially of how he speaks to people who are disenfranchised and oppressed, talking about class. And the other thing is, even when during that last year of his life, I mean, he was learning so much just about the world, and he was constantly going to go out and continue learning. He wasn't ever going to stop learning. In fact, even he didn't spend a lot of time like going around in the South per se, but the day after he had died, he was expected to go speak. He was invited by Fannie Lou Hamer to speak in Mississippi. Mm-hmm. So he was constantly going to, continue to speak with people. But what I'm talking also is during that last week of his life, even, we write this in our book, his house is firebombed, and he still flies out to Detroit. And it's so important. I mean, his family has been bombed out of their home. He can't live. I mean, they're bombed out of their home. And so he's leaving his family with people he's hoping they're safe, but he's still going to Detroit to make sure that this message that he gets out to people and anybody who will listen about what he's seen and learned, and the people that he's met, with in Africa, and his Hajj, and then also what he sees happening in the world, in the United States, when he's talking about the power of our vote in a block. Mm-hmm. At that point, that's what he was talking about. He was also talking about the alignments of the world powers, and he's talking about, and he's, he knows his time is coming to an end, but he's still doing this. So that energy, it doesn't die with him; it continues. So that information is continuing, and people have picked up his book. They have continued to, if you look at what the Black Panthers were doing in the 60s and 70s, this is a continuation of his work. But then we also look at the other side of how they were crushed, but that's, it's always going to be this fight. But yes, his work is important. His ideas are important. And as long as people are continuing to, pick up the word and his word and pursue his work, there's also going to be this other side that's going to want to crush it. Mm-hmm. And we've seen this happen over and over and over again.
There's so much in this book that we just didn't even get close to covering. I've got favorite parts that I've marked that I was hoping we would get to. Unfortunately, we just can't. But the energy, the contextualization of this book really draws you in to a point where the conversations are happening. It's not like some of the other books where that they're very academic in tone. This one puts you in the place, in the time. So I just want to thank you for...
But let me just say this thing again about Malcolm's work, is that he was always still talking about, it was important, you can't work alone. You
Right.
have to work in your organizations. You have to work in your groups. And that's still very important. And I do see people picking up, continuing with that. So that's also one of the important things.
Go ahead.
Hello, my name is Rudy. Thank you, Glenn and Tamara, for being here this evening. I appreciate your comment about the perpetual learner. I think that's great, among others, of course. If you all forgive me, I might have a twofold question. Mm-hmm. I wonder about as you bring forward the familial and societal and cultural context of Malcolm X through your father and even your own personal experience, and you took up the mantle of your father's work, and maybe even along the way, was there anything that, for lack of a better word, surprised you as you're doing this? I imagine you had a lot of direct exposure over the years that might have presented a familiarity. And so as you took up the process with the book and the story of Malcolm X and your engagement with the permanence that you were creating, was there anything that surprised you about this that you didn't think would happen with your continued experience with your father and Malcolm X? And after your book tour is completed, I'm curious, do you have any other plans with the story of Malcolm X? Thank you.
Well, the first question, things that surprised me. I mean, there were so many lessons that I just learned through Malcolm. One of the things I enjoyed, just learning how people, even when people didn't like them, they still had to give him his props, and that was really interesting to watch. Also, to me, part of what was so special working on this project with my father was that I knew, my father was directly impacted by what we were writing about. He grew up in Tuscaloosa, he lived through Jim Crow, he went into the Army, he saw a lot of this, but then also he takes the lessons of Malcolm and he he's also about organizing. He's one of the co-founders, one of 44 co-founders of the National Association of Black Journalists. And then even in the 90s, while working on this and the many jobs he had at Newsday, as well as being a commentator on his weekly CBS news show on Sundays called Sunday Edition, he co-founds another group called the Trotter Group, which is about helping Black columnists be better. So I'm like, these lessons of organizing and carrying on our stories and the importance of telling our stories, Malcolm telling his story and getting his story out before he leaves this planet is so important to us. Us looking into this, and even having this story of Malcolm being portrayed in what's going to come up in the opera, to having it in another genre. I mean, this is, to me, our stories, and our stories, everybody's stories, or we have to, when we look at what's happening today, I think that there's a disconnect with history, and we don't know what happened, or we want to deny what happened for whatever the reasons, okay? But the thing is, it happened, and you can't ignore that it happened. It's because what's happening is it's happening again. Why are we facing what we're facing, fascism, today in America? I mean, we fought against this, but we're disconnected from that. And we want to act like it's not so bad to have that happen. And so I think I look at this as we have to really make sure we get our stories out, we get the history out. One of the important things about biographies is that it personalizes history and through these lives. And that's what we were doing with Malcolm's story and The Dead Are Arising. And this wasn't what we went in to do, honestly. We just wanted to, learn more about Malcolm, write this story, and share these stories of Malcolm. But in the process, what I'm learning is that history is personalized when we talk about these lives, about whoever we're talking about. And so that connection, biographies become really important. So yeah, we have to learn these stories, but and however we learn, whether we're going to the opera or writing poems about it, but also we have to understand that these lives are personal. History is personal. It affects us. But the other thing I also hope that people are getting and I have also picked up even that in the aftermath of the book being published, is the importance of telling these stories and connecting with history, but making it personal. Okay, we made it more personal by talking about Malcolm X, right? But now, I hope everybody wants to talk to their younger kids, and their kids talk to their older relatives about their history and their family. What was it like for our families to have gone to experience the Great Depression, World War II, the draft, all of these things? What was that like? Because now that impacts of like understanding why, you know, some of our elders weren't so social to us. We didn't understand because we weren't talking to them and asking them their questions, but they may not want to talk about it. But now time has passed, and let's open up these conversations, because now it becomes personal. And now, because it's personal, you care about it.
I guess next question, please.
May I circle back to the second part of my question?
What
We
was
wanted
that
to
again?
know if you have any other projects upcoming.
Still working, promoting this book about Malcolm X, and you know, I just realized how important this book was, especially with the recognition we got, and so we received, and one of the things happened was that I was traveling a couple of years ago, and I was realizing a lot of people did not even know the book came out. So that's why I said, you know, I think let's take the time, and instead of moving on to the next thing, let's take time and talk about this, share this, and tell the story and the experience of this. Because as people read this, they're impacted by this. It's seen by everybody in this room, in the questions, and this thrills me. But there are a lot of people who don't even know this book came out. And I really think it's important that they know that this book is out, and that we were able to speak to a lot of people who knew Malcolm and tell these different, you know, stories about Malcolm. And the other thing I would like to do, I'm working on some other projects about my father. You know, I think his life is also very important to talk about as a journalist, and so.
Thank you. My question is that I haven't heard you mention the FBI in any of the talk tonight. And it's my understanding that the FBI knew about the assassination when Malcolm came back from his Hajj. He was much less, he was not anti-white as he was, people portrayed him as anti-white. And this shook him up with Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam, which persisted in the anti-white, So what's your understanding of the circumstances around his assassination? And you can think about other assassinations that have a lot of, undetermined circumstances about them, like Martin Luther King, his assassination, and JFK. There's a lot of stuff that's been hidden that, our right-wingers in government and FBI, CIA may have been involved with that.
Well, it's clear that the FBI was aware. They had infiltrated the Nation of Islam. They infiltrated Malcolm's organization after he had left the Nation of Islam. The New York Police Department had infiltrated his organization. My father and I, we wanted to find out what really happened on August 21st. And so we weren't focusing so much on what happened with the trial. We wanted to find out what actually happened. And we talk about that in the final chapters of our book, and I'll direct people to read that. But they're great chapters.
It's a fascinating chapter. Point of fact that the book notates that soon after the gunshot, the FBI informant was on the phone while Malcolm is on the stage, barely holding on to life, reporting that he has been shot. So they know in real time the situation is, anyway.
And what we do really with the chapters is show even how these how the FBI informants and the New York Police Department informants, they didn't work together as far as sharing the information, but 2 people served over 20 years who were not in the room, who did not kill Malcolm. They were exonerated in 2021, one posthumously. And our work was, it did not reopen the case. That I will give credit to Abdur Muhammad. I'm sorry if I have his, who did the documentary, Who Really Killed Malcolm X, which was on Netflix. And that did reopen the case. But what our work was doing was that it was showing you what we found, what happened, how these departments worked together or did not work together. And what came out with the exoneration is they found even further information to support what we were doing, a lot more details. And I actually did write out about that too, and you can look that up. I did that for The Nation back in 2021.
We have time for one more question.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks so much for being here. This is very great. I'm linking the time of Malcolm to today. Today we are facing, Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, anything that is embraced by African Americans or promoted or generated is demonized and canceled or silenced or whatever. And I'm just wondering if his embrace of Islam and the also, it was Muhammad Ali as well was a strong proponent of Islam. Whether that is there is a thread between that and the demonization of people and practice and the faith of Islam that is very rampant in the U.S. now.
Okay. Can you share what the question is? Oh, I'm sorry.
The question is whether you see a thread between whether the demonization and cancellation and the effort to delegitimize the Islamic faith or its influence on people or was rooted kind of the way there is targeting of anything that is embraced by the Black population as being evil or as being problematic. I don't know if I'm making that clear, maybe not.
Do I see a thread?
Do you see the seeds of it in Malcolm's time, or is this something?
No, it's before. This goes back a long time. There is demonization of Marcus Garvey, demonization of W.B. Du Bois, Paul Robeson. This is there, and not just Black people. There are others, who fall into this. So it is what at that time, if we're talking about the FBI here in this country and under J. Edgar Hoover, what he found was a threat to what was considered the standards of what the United States is. And he had a whole organization that he had worked, and he didn't create it, by the way. But he definitely
Institutionalized.
he didn't create it because he came into it, but he definitely built it. He built it up, and he definitely had used it. And so there's anything he's gone after. Anti-communist was another thing that he had gone after, and you hear this talk again, right? Leftist communists. This has never stopped. This didn't start with Malcolm X. This has been going on for a very long time.
Okay, thank you.
And it didn't start with J. Edgar Hoover either. And the other thing, I just want to say one last thing about the assassination. The work of the Innocence Project was also hugely important in the exoneration. So,
Tamara, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
She is autographing books.
Thank you.
Hello. And I just want to remind the audience that